Welcome to No Man's an Island, a podcast powered by Men's Therapy Hub, a directory of male therapists for male clients. On this episode, I'm speaking to Tate Smith. Now, we're recording this episode on Friday, March 27th. If you're one of our keen regulars who listens on release day, hi, Tuesday, March 31st, that's Trans Day of Visibility. So given that Men's Therapy Hub is trans inclusive and proud, Tate and I agreed that Tuesday would be the perfect day to release this chat because he is a trans man. He is, of course, much more than that. He's an award-winning activist and speaker who was recently named one of Attitude Magazine's LGBTQ+ trailblazers. Tate has become a leading voice on trans visibility, gender equality, and the evolving conversation around masculinity. Hey, Tate.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
That is quite all right. Thank you for coming on. First question on this podcast is always the same. So how did you get into this space, which, given how I've just introduced you, I'm presuming is going to be quite an interesting story. So take it away.
Yeah, I got into it by accident, actually. So I came out and started transitioning in the workplace at the same time. So I've been transitioning medically since the spring of 2019. And it was the following spring in 2020 that I started speaking publicly about my transition. And I didn't want to speak about just my transition. I've always lived with anxiety and experienced issues with my mental health, and I really wanted to weave that into my talks. And so I feel like I naturally went into the men's mental health space just by speaking about it. And I've been really fortunate that there's been some great charities out there and people like yourselves who have reached out and wanted to hear my perspectives, whether it's by podcasts or campaigns, and that's just by posting on LinkedIn and Instagram. So it's been very, very powerful. And yeah, the last 6 years have really evolved into speaking about gender equality and masculinity, and actually the joys that brings for me as a transgender man.
What's that been like to not only transition, which of course is going to have its challenges in itself, and I would like to hear a little bit about that. I don't want to focus too much on the transitioning aspect of this within this conversation, but also doing that semi-publicly, doing that in a spirit of, I want to be open about it. You know, it's Trans Day of Visibility when this is being released, and you have been extremely visible within your transition.
Yes. I mean, it's been really, really interesting for me. But I've just had to have a get on with it mentality. And, nothing is a taboo for me. I could just stick to talking about transitioning and do terminology training in corporates and other organizations, but I choose not to do that. I want to speak from the heart about my lived experience. And for me, that's about speaking about how much I love being trans and the unique perspectives that I bring in order to educate people. But like you say, to be that visible trans person, which I think we need now more than ever, but not just that, a visible transgender man, which unfortunately we are lacking in UK. I'm not trying to say I want to be the one visible transgender man, because that's definitely not what I want to do, and that's a lot of pressure. But if I can educate people by my unique perspectives, whether it be menopause, my lived experience with that, sexism and misogyny I face living as a woman, how invalidated I feel when I share about my mental health versus the adulation I received as a woman, things like that, I think they can actually help people to better understand cis people. So really what I'm doing is just trying to help people of all genders.
Tell us about that. Because we spoke about this when we had a chat the other day, and that was something that really stuck with me, was this sense of when you presented as female, your mental health concerns were taken more seriously than they are now. And I think this is where we actually miss a trick in terms of trans people, not just obviously treating trans people as people, which in my opinion is absurd that some factions don't do that, but also that there is a real and this isn't why you should exist, to help cis people understand and learn. Yes, but of course we can all learn from each other, and you have had this experience of living and presenting as both genders, and you have had this experience of being treated very differently. So what was that like for you to suddenly go like, wow, this is different, this is not the same, I'm becoming unequal in this way?
Mm. So for me, I've had anxiety since I was living as a woman in my teens, and I always found that when I would open up about that, I was met with "Oh, you're okay" response, and "Oh, let's have a chat about it, hon." It was, you know, females tend to look after each other, and there was always that chat that was offered to me. And then I found that after I transitioned and started living as a man, and I would drop into conversation that I have anxiety or I see a therapist, people would not respond. People would just go silent. And this was both men and women. And it was incredibly awkward for me to go from receiving, outpouring of love and support to people just moving the conversation along. Oh, okay. And then just going on to something else. And I think naturally somebody might want to go, okay, I'm never going to speak about it ever again. But the activist in me was like, no. And I have, called people in on that. Oh, sorry. I just mentioned something really personal and you didn't respond? And then I leave it there and let them kind of, and try and have a conversation about it, because I don't want to assume, and maybe somebody doesn't have the mental capacity that day, but I think just to shut down after someone says something so personal, you should actually be quite honoured they've opened up to you, and try and have a mini conversation if you can.
And of course, as you rightly say, some people don't have capacity certain times. Some people don't ever have capacity, and that's fair. But what you saw was a wider trend. How did you personally respond to that internally? Because suddenly you're experiencing what I, as a man who's lived as presenting as a man my whole life, have reckoned with, and it's a lot of what my work has been about, and a lot of listeners who are male, most of our listeners are male, that won't surprise you, have experienced a lot, but maybe we weren't really fully aware of. But to you, it was very, very clear because you'd had the alternate experience. So how
Yeah.
did that sit with you? Like, how did that play against you? And I know, because we're going to get on to talk about gender euphoria. How did that sit with you in terms of you actually expressing your fullness as a trans man, as a man?
I'll be honest, it made me feel really sad. I mean, in retrospect, I can say, I called people in and I challenged people where I could. And, I didn't always have the confidence to do that. I do remember the first time that happened, it was like, oh, okay. And it's continued happening over my near 7-year transition. And I'll be honest, I've got used to it, which I think is quite bad. But yeah, it's just been really weird to navigate. I mean, I never want to complain about living authentically and the privilege to live as a man, because I absolutely love it and I waited years for this to happen. But I do get upset about it, because there are times where I do just want to open up and talk to somebody, and not just about my transness either, just about maybe
Being a human.
anxious feelings and being human, yes, and being overwhelmed. And from what I can observe, and these are just my personal observations, is that I don't think people have the toolkit in order to talk to men about mental health. I mean, I see a lot of campaigns, I see a lot of conversations that say men need to open up more, men need to open up more. And I see men opening up all the time. I'm one of them. I don't think people are actually listening. And I think people could do better to listen actively as well.
Yeah, what a great message. I completely agree with that. I'm curious also, so as well as having your emotional reality invalidated, I'm assuming the more and more you presented as masculine, the more and more it was invalidated. I wonder what other emotional challenges came with, perhaps the use of testosterone, or whatever else it might be. Like, what were the biggest emotional challenges for you in the transition that perhaps you're still reckoning with?
So testosterone, I think is quite well known to increase your irritability and anger. So it doesn't mean that I turned into the Hulk overnight, but I certainly got a lot more irritable and hungry. Actually, I mean, the first 3 weeks in starting my hormones, I was eating 2 dinners a night. I was having vivid nightmares and night sweats. It was crazy, but
Really?
yeah,
I haven't heard
testosterone.
about that before. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a taboo within our community, and I found out through a trans male friend. I was not warned about this, but you can't possibly be, because every transition is so different. You get told by, the clinic before you start your hormones, like the core stuff that's going to happen to you, which basically reads like a male puberty sex education book. You're going to get sweaty, you're going to get acne, your shoulders are going to get more broad, and I think naturally these are probably obvious things. And then they say, increased appetite and maybe your mood will change. Some people go calmer, some people grow irritable. It depends. And for me, that's what happened within the first 3 weeks. And I'll be honest, I had to learn how to like control my emotions, particularly when I was getting closer to the date of needing my injection, because naturally your hormones spike. So like I said, it doesn't mean that I was having an angry meltdown, but I would find myself being more irritable, or maybe I needed my own space a bit more. One of the great changes that comes with hormones is the lovely deepening of your voice and growing that Adam's apple. And I had to learn how to, speak from my chest and my stomach so that I could make my voice sound deeper. That was just for me personally. But with that, I had to learn how to rein it in sometimes, and that naturally, where you've got a loud, booming voice, particularly if you say it in certain settings or in a certain way, it can come across as angry or too powerful or too confrontational. And I was pulled up on it early in my transition. So I had to sort of train myself how to use all these new changes that were happening to my body. But mostly it gave me confidence as much as it gave me hunger pains. I mean, um, they told me, my endocrinologist, when I started testosterone, you're going to be more focused, confident, and productive. And for me, I've definitely lived up to all three of those. But the confidence I love, because I needed it throughout my transition. Those emotional periods where maybe you're looking in the mirror, you're over analyzing your appearance, and you're going, why don't I have a beard yet? And then you have to go, oh God, because you're going through like a 13-year-old boy's puberty. Some men don't get beards until their early 20s, and just learning to love yourself and just give yourself the grace to just enjoy yourself and enjoy seeing these changes happen to you. And you know what? The emotional roller coasters, figuring it all out, is all part of it. Just like a cisgender man going through their puberty in their teens. That's exactly what I'm going through now, which is obviously why I look so young for 27.
Well, yeah, and many men would be jealous of that.
Thank you.
So you've explained really eloquently, actually, some of the challenges there. I know that there will be listeners who are interested in the kind of gender dysphoria angle of this. So I would like, if it's okay with you, just to talk a little bit about that, about what that experience was. But actually, I'm really, really interested, because I think that a lot of us can learn about gender euphoria, because I
Okay.
think we're living in a culture where, masculinity, for example, is being derided. And how can we help young men, young like boys, to feel more comfortable and confident within their masculinity, not to shame their masculinity? And for you, you've had to learn on the hoof, like
Yeah.
as all of us are, to be fair,
Yeah.
but in a much shorter time frame, how to feel that sense of gender euphoria. So can you take us a little bit through the journey, first of all, a little bit about the dysphoria, and then how you found gender euphoria, or is that something that you're still working on?
Great question. I mean, for me, dysphoria, so for anybody who's listening or watching and doesn't know what gender dysphoria is, that's effectively the mismatch a trans person has between their brain and their body. So in my case, I was assigned female at birth, but I knew that I was a man and I wanted to live as a man. So I've
When?
taken, that was probably around 16. It took me quite a while, I'll be honest. A lot of trans people that I've met say they knew from the age of 2, which definitely wasn't my experience, for other reasons, you know, my upbringing, not knowing the language, not even knowing that transitioning was possible, not seeing a trans person in my community or on the TV or in a magazine, all sorts of reasons. But once I found that language at 16, I was off. Came out, went back into the closet because my family didn't support me, unfortunately. And then a couple of years later, at 19, just as I was turning 20, I decided to put myself first and fund my own transition through private healthcare because the NHS waiting list was too long. Even then, 2 years, they told me. That was October 2018, and I still haven't been seen yet. So I spent thousands of pounds to live authentically as myself, and I'm still on a waiting list, which now has an average wait time of 10 years just to get this diagnosis of gender dysphoria so that you can access hormones and surgery. And obviously, like I say, I'm 7 years into my transition. So by the time I see them, it will just be for blood tests. So, but that's just the state of the healthcare. But for me, that mismatch brings on feelings of dysphoria. So that I would say is the extreme discomfort you feel. So the looking in the mirror and not seeing who you feel inside staring back at you. And once I started taking testosterone and all these lovely physical changes started happening to me, the chiseled jawline, the Adam's apple, some bit of stubble, the shoulders broadening, that dysphoria started alleviating. But not only that, it turned into euphoria. So the really exciting thing about transitioning as a trans man is just how excited you get to see all these changes. Like, I remember when I first started getting chest hairs and toe hairs and arm hair and just being so excited about that. And then when I started looking like my dad, who was my absolute hero as a kid, that was euphoric for me because he was the most manly guy to me, and he's fortunate enough to be somewhat attractive, and I thought, well, if I can be as good looking as he is, then I'll be off to the races. But yeah, I was really happy to see those changes happen, and with that confidence the hormones brings you're just in like this bubble of joy all the time, and it's honestly guided me through my transition. And obviously there have been times where I felt dysphoric. So unfortunately, I can still get misgendered. So people calling me she or her, but it's by accident. It's a quick glance, I think, where they see maybe I'm 5'3" and, you know, I don't know, pretty features. I don't know. It's on the other person. And obviously that brings on feelings of dysphoria. But luckily, where I'm so far into my transition, I have that toolkit to not let it affect me and to take a step back, to breathe and just let it pass through. You know, I can be sad for that day, but I don't want to be sad for that week, which is what used to happen early in my transition when I was getting misgendered all the time. So euphoria really is that flip side of that discomfort. And I think men could maybe learn from that. You know,
Yes.
I love being a man. In fact, the word masculinity makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, and it makes my heart go because that word describes who I am. And I've observed, and I've been at fault of this myself in my talk, saying that I speak about toxic masculinity. Not that masculinity is toxic, because it's definitely not, but some aspects of it that are toxic. And I really have been detaching myself from that term because I don't think it's productive, particularly with the conversations we're having recently with Manosphere and certain men also named Tate. I mean, I picked the right name, didn't I? But, you know,
Yeah.
things like this, I think actually I just want to talk about the joys that come with being a man. And I think cisgender men can learn from that. Get excited over changes in your appearance. When you get a nice haircut, like, be confident, like, love yourself. Like, when you get a new outfit, like, these are things I do for myself. Like when I went up a size in Primark t-shirts, that was the best day ever. And men don't compliment each other, and I think they should compliment each other more. Like have your own feelings of gender euphoria, because they're going to help you with your confidence and your self-esteem. No matter if you're trans or not.
And I think one of the challenges that we face in an increasingly, let's start that again. I think one of the challenges that we face in an increasingly binary world is that we do talk about gender as if it is a binary. But the thing is, Tate, is that your expression of masculinity and my expression of masculinity and anybody else's expression of masculinity is unique to them. And if we are focused on there being a unified, rigid concept of what masculinity is, then we are all far less likely to experience gender euphoria. And I think that was something for me that was incredible, that once I softened from the university rugby lad phase and realized that actually my expression of manhood sure can be big and loud and brash and confident and angry sometimes, hopefully not as often as I am calm and grounded and soft and able to hold myself, and that all of that is me. And not just the bit of me that should be, and I say should with air quotes, that should be brave and tough and strong, but also, do you know what? Brave enough to ask for help, strong enough to hold my friends when they're struggling, like tough enough to speak my boundaries. Those are all incredibly like masculine things to do if I choose that they are within my wheelhouse of masculinity.
I love
So
that. Yeah.
I have such affinity with this idea of gender euphoria, and yet it isn't something that we really talk about very much.
I know, and I think we should. And actually, just jumping off the back of what you said, I mean, in the beginning of my transition, I thought that I had to be this one version of a man because I grew up in a council estate in Essex, and all I saw was geezers and lads or people, projecting as that at least, and alpha males and Danny Dyer types. And I thought that's the way that I had to be. And it's just not. And I mean, I would never refer to my childhood where I used to love playing with dolls and watching Hannah Montana. And I even stopped listening to like things like Madonna because I thought that wouldn't make me manly, and just like really pushing these weird ideals on myself. And then as I've discovered my identity and got settled with my own masculinity, and I actually started meeting other men who, maybe had some traits that I thought weren't aligned with stereotypical masculinity. I just thought, you've only got to look at society and see all the different types of men to realize there really is no one way. And I know that may sound basic, but it's really not this stereotype ideal. But in the beginning, I pushed that onto myself, and it was only really through exploration. And I think just going, you know what, I just get to make this up as I go along. Let's embrace it. The music, loving theatre and film, and not being into sports. I don't like going to the gym. I don't want my body to look that way. I'm not really a big drinker. I don't need to pretend to knock back 6 pints. I even had height dysphoria at one point and got shoe inserts from Amazon, which was a silly idea because I'm 5'3", because I thought I've got to try and look taller. I need to present, that way. And it just did me a disservice. And when I stopped concentrating on my appearance and fixating on what sort of man I wanted to project, that's when I started looking inward. And I as a result, I'm much happier, and that's contributed to my feelings of euphoria and joy.
How much was that partly an internal process, and with it an external process? Because you mentioned there, first of all, you were kind of aping the Essex geezer, and then you realized actually that wasn't who you are. And so then were you looking around at role models and trying on different types of masculinity for size for a while? Like how did you learn, or were you looking around for inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, listen, at heart, I say this to quite a few people, I'm a working class boy from Essex that just happens to be trans. That's at the core of who I am. But I don't need to be this hyper ideal of an Essex boy. And I certainly don't need to live up to that. And I didn't have any role models as per se, but I did look at people who speak about redefining masculinity, as it were, like people like Jordan Stevens and you know, Dr. Alex George and people like this who represent this more softer version and speak from the heart and eloquently like I do. And I think I sort of absorbed that throughout my transition, but it definitely was an internal process because there was a lot of expectations I was putting on myself up here. And I really had to sort that out. But the last couple of years, I would say that really took me to the half point of my transition about 3.5 years in. And these last 3 years have been the best because I'm settled. I don't overanalyze changes in my appearance. I've actually focused on who I am as an individual, which I think is really important. What are my hobbies? What are my interests? You know, and I did, as you put so eloquently there, tried different types of masculinity on for size. The geezer. At one point, I lived as a gay man because before I realised I was trans, I realised I was pansexual. And as I transitioned and my preferences leaned towards men, I started living as a gay man. Then that came with all of its own things. And then I started dating women, and then people presumed that I was straight. And now I just don't have a label for my sexuality. And then I was a legal secretary for many years. That came with its own sort of expectations, and working in law and being that corporate sort of finance bro type of masculinity. And really, I just settled on being a gentleman. You know, I love my old Hollywood movies. I love vintage stuff. It doesn't mean that I'm engaging in chivalry or you know, being super traditional and toxic. I just like to look after people around me, because ultimately I want people to look after me and care for me as well. It's like you say, you can be strong, but you can also ask for help as well.
Well, hopefully you can. I know it's something that a lot of us still struggle with. And is that something that you still struggle with?
Definitely. I mean, even with all this exploration and giving it large, I'm still gonna struggle when I need help. And you know, I've been to men's mental health groups. I've sought crisis counselling through the charity Mind a couple of years ago. Like, you know, I definitely have some tough times. So I'm not always asking for help, even with how extroverted I am. But I've been quite lucky that after the lack of family support I received, I built a chosen family in London, which I think is really important. But I've also tried to make a conscious effort to nurture male friendships as well, which is still something I'm exploring actually, because I don't actually have that many close male friends. Whereas when I was living as a woman, I had like tons of female friends. And I think what I'm still navigating is having those like catch ups and quite emotional conversations. I'm not saying men are incapable of having them. It's just that they don't happen as frequently as they did
Or
when
as
I was
or as
a kid.
easily?
Well, always easily, yeah. I mean, when I was on a men's mental health campaign once, somebody gave me this great analogy, and I'm probably going to mess it up because I can't quote it verbatim. But this man said to me, you know, men tend to stand shoulder to shoulder. You know, they go fishing, they go for darts, they go for pints. They're not looking at each other talking. But women, they go for catch ups, brunches, they share lipstick in the bathroom, they're standing opposite each other talking. And I thought that was really interesting. I mean, it could be a tad bit of generalization, but from my experiences, that's definitely what I've seen and lived through.
Well, there is some research or like theory into that, in that evolutionarily men were on sentry duty, for example, so would sit side by side looking out of the village, like scanning for danger. They would be walking and, like going hunting. And I know a lot of research now shows that women would hunt too, but men would obviously do the lion's share. And women would be behind in the village, safer, talking to each other face to face with children, right? And playing. And so there is some evidence. And that's actually why when I work face to face with clients, which I don't do at the moment, which is sad, but I sit my chairs 45-degree angles. So we're not facing each other, because actually when we do face each other as men, there's also research to show that we are constantly scanning to see whether or not the other man is uncomfortable with what we're talking about, because we are looking for the confirmation of the bias that you're not going to be able to deal with the challenge that I'm bringing. So I could be chatting to you, Tate, face to face, and you could just get like a bit of dust in your nose and just like wrinkle your nose. But my psyche will tell me there's evidence that he's not comfortable. Tate's not comfortable listening to what I've got to say. So I'm not going to talk about it anymore. So actually, in my men's mental health workshops, I get them to experience the difference of being face to face and being side to side and speaking out into the room. And they're all just like, wow, it's so much easier to speak side by side, because not only are you not then scanning the other person, you're also just speaking it into the room, and it's much more freeing. So there is evidence and research to back that up.
That is so interesting. I never knew that, but that does make sense. I mean, I think even just struggling with eye contact as well, like it can be so awkward, and it does feel a bit like of a performance, and like the pressure to get this information across. And if someone does a slight movement, because I certainly, have thought that. So yeah, that's really interesting.
It would be remiss of me on Trans Day of Visibility to not ask a trans person about their experiences of the current conversations going on around trans people. And what I will say is, and I'm assuming you will recognize this, that a lot of the conversation about trans people is about trans women and about trans women taking up space. The constant ridiculous conversations about public bathrooms, which by the way, when women first started entering the public space 100 years ago, women weren't allowed to use public bathrooms. When black people started being a thing in public spaces, black people weren't allowed to use public bathrooms. When gay men started to become more prominent, gay men weren't allowed to use public bathrooms at first. There were all these questions about safety of all of these people using public bathrooms. So here we are again talking about public bathrooms. Anyway, away from that, what is it like for you to be a trans person and to have a kind of, let's say, a decade where there was liberalization of the mentality towards trans people, and then over the past 3-4 years there seems to have been this pushback? That must have been really difficult for you.
Yeah, and actually I came out in 2015, and 2014, if you remember, was when Time magazine did a cover with Laverne Cox and called it the year of the transgender tipping point, because the amount of representation we had on screen in the media had increased. And it worked for me because that gave me the language that I needed, even though all I saw was trans women, and the only trans male representation I saw was Hilary Swank in Boys Don't Cry, which was a movie that came out the year that I was born, 1999. None in the UK, and that hasn't changed at all. And it felt like, actually, for a couple of years with Caitlyn Jenner coming out, and Elliot Page, even trans man over in the US, the dial started to sort of shift. And then, like you said, the last 3-4 years, it's become so fixated on gender agenda, LGBT, alphabet mafia, these horrible terms people throw at us, the bathroom debate. I mean, this has become such a sensationalized issue. And even in the last day, we've seen trans women are now banned from the Olympics, which is going to affect cisgender women, because there are some cis women out there who naturally have higher testosterone levels, but let's not get into that. So there's all these debates about sports and bathrooms when us trans people don't speak about that at all. And we just want to live our lives and not have to worry about our safety all the time. The world can be cruel to us anyway. It's already a big deal to come out and live as our true and authentic selves. Most of us don't receive the acceptance from our family, our friends, our communities, our schools, our workplaces. A lot of trans men come out, transition, and go back into the closet stealth, because they think, well, I passed very well as a man. Nobody needs to know. I have met loads of trans men who have come up to me after my talks and said, thanks for coming into my workplace. I've been transitioning for 20 years. I'm not coming out, but I appreciate what you do. And when I started talking and meeting, I know. And when I started talking and meeting these people, and seeking out older corporate trans male role models, that's when I realized I'm probably never going to meet them, because they've gone stealth, because this is what they're telling me in private. And the last couple of years has been difficult. I mean, you kindly referred to me as an activist in my bio at the beginning, but in the last, I would say, year or so, I've really left that world behind and shifted more into storytelling, and I'm now focusing on learning my craft with writing and speaking, and still working in corporate spaces, because I don't have the mental capacity to fly that flag, quite literally, especially after the DEI backlash we saw last year, the Supreme Court ruling. Like you say, trans men were just left out of the conversation. And I've been speaking for 6 years about this lack of trans masculine visibility. And after last year, what we saw on both sides of the pond in the US and UK, we were only used as a gotcha moment. When the bathroom debate was being brought up and people going, yeah, trans women shouldn't use women's bathrooms. And then someone would turn around and go, oh, but what about trans men? So what would you want people like Tate using the women's bathroom? How's that going to help the epidemic of violence against women and girls? Then people will go, aha, gotcha. And that's the only time trans men are being spoken about. It's unacceptable. We bring so much to unique perspectives, to gender equality, to what it's like to live as a woman and a man. These things we're talking about, mental health, even menopause. I have gone into corporate spaces and men have come up to me after I've done a talk about like experiencing menopause as a result of taking my hormones, and they've gone, well, now I care about menopause now because I've heard a man speak about it. So I'm seeing this impact, this change through just sharing my experiences. And people seem to forget about that, which really frustrates me. And I really want people to really start thinking more about the great things that trans men can bring to society, but also to really pay them some love and attention, because, we have to deal with masculine stereotypes and ideals, and actually we're expected to get on with it, living as a man. And then people forget the trans part, and it's like, no, we still need the love from our community too. So I'd really like to see that improving in, say, the next 3 or 4 years. But I will say this, I do think it is improving, because since the start of this year, the talks I've been doing, the press, even me going on Good Morning Britain and speaking to, the Times Radio even, which is more right wing last week, people are starting to go, why aren't we hearing from trans men? Which I think is great. People are actually specifying this now, which is great, because last year I was actually getting asked what a trans man is, and people was asking me, so does this mean you're transitioning to become a woman? And I'd go, no, I used to be one. And I'd go, wait, what? Because they just don't know that trans men exist.
Right.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that? I think there's an obvious answer as to why trans women are taking up more of the headlines. Why do you think that trans men take up so little of that airtime?
I think because this notion of being a man is just the best thing to be. This is for me personally. I think it's much easier to understand somebody assigned female at birth transitioning to male. And this is what people have said to me. They've said, Tate, I can get behind you because you were born a woman and you wanted to become a man, but I can't understand why a man would want to become a woman. So they're instantly invalidating the trans woman's experience because they're just referring to them as a man that wants to play dress up as a woman, which obviously is not the case. And you could go deeper into it and talk about patriarchy and things like that, but I don't like to get into things like that. I just think it's just easier to understand because we aren't sensationalized or seen as predators or people to be feared. I think they then transfer that hate and that anti-trans rhetoric and transphobia onto trans women. And there's that real lack of understanding there, which can be turned into hate and violence and all the rest of it. So it's very unfortunate. I don't have the perfect academic answer, but that's definitely my felt sense.
Well, I'm not sure that anybody does, and I think that's part of the problem. Is it's still a much misunderstood issue. One thing I am interested in, you mentioned it much earlier in our conversation, was this idea of privilege. Because what I'm curious about is I have a trans male friend who I've known for many years, and as he started to transition, he started to have conversations with me about how I navigate through public spaces. I mean, I'm also 6'3" and he's not, right? But how he had to start to change the way that he would stand on a bus. Like, where would he sit? Like, be more careful because he presented as male. As he was taking testosterone, he starts to realize he was just like staring at boobs on the tube, and he was like, I can't do that because now I look like a man. I can't just stare at boobs. Like, that makes people feel uncomfortable. Like actually starting to recognize that the more that you present as a man, the more that people will respond to you as a man. So, like,
Yes.
what was that like for you, like out in public day to day? How did people start responding to you differently, like people that you didn't know? And how did you have to navigate that?
Well, one of the first instances where I knew was when I saw a woman cross the road from me late at night when I was walking behind her, and she kept turning her head to look at me as if to say, oh, is he still walking behind me? And I remember being in that position maybe a year before and just being bewildered as to why somebody would be scared of me walking behind them when I'm only 5'3" and baby face. But I thought, no, Tate, come on. It's just the fact a guy is walking behind you used to do exactly the same, walking home from work on an unlit street. And I remember when I was about to start my hormones and I was at a birthday party with a friend, and I was playing with children. This friend of mine, it was her nieces and nephews. And I remember just plaiting a girl's hair. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to be able to do this when I start transitioning because I'm going to look creepy. And even now, if I go to parks, like I can't sit on a bench near young children, or because I'm a guy. Like I'm just going to be, people going to presume that I'm a creep. So I've had to adjust my behavior. And I think it's really interesting what you said about your friend being on the bus and staring at boobs, because that's definitely happened to me. I can't compliment women on their outfits because I'm worried they're going to think I'm chatting them up. And I'm also too worried to compliment guys on their outfits or ask where their shoes are from in case I get punched, things like this. And even like my voice and having to rein that in because I've been told, oh, it sounds like you're raising your voice at me. And I'm like, oh God, I'm definitely not. And I had to realize, oh my God, there's this new power that's come in with my deep booming voice that I've sort of softened really for this podcast. But out and about, I guess I sound quite loud. And I would say that really ties into my like feelings of privilege, I guess, when it comes to safety and navigating the world and being able to walk to, Sainsbury's at 9 o'clock at night in the dark and not have to worry about being harassed or being catcalled by builders, stuff like that. But then on the flip side, there are moments where I haven't felt very privileged. So, for example, people not listening to me share about my mental health, or this expectation that I've got to be strong. Something I really struggle with, which is a bit lighter, is on the train station when I see somebody struggling with a pram and they look to me and I know they think he's going to help me because he's a man, and I'm like, I'm not strong enough to help you with this pram up these stairs. So I always just like run off because I just don't want that expectation put on me. Or I find that when I'm on public transport, I get glared at sometimes just for sitting if there's women standing around me, and they give me this glare, and I don't know if this is correct, but this is just my felt sense that they give me this glare as if to say, why haven't you given your seat up for me? But it's not because they need the seat by the looks of it. I don't want to presume, but I think it's just based off being a woman. And I'm like, oh, okay, things like that. So, I mean, there's just so many examples, but that would take up another hour of your time, I think.
Mm. I think there's a big conversation going on in the world right now about what like healthy masculinity or a good man should be, right? And I balk whenever I hear someone say should, because in our kind of therapeutic training, we always talked about, well, can you change the should for a could? Because should is inherently judgmental. Like the concept of should, like, as a man, you should be helping somebody, you should be giving up your seat.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm sitting on a seat and I'm like, you don't know that I've got like a knackered back from cricket,
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
flaring up right now. You just see a young-ish, I'm nearly 40 now, fit-ish, I'm nearly 40 now. Yeah, like man, right? And therefore you should give up. And it's like, okay, so for you, where does that sit with you? Because you've had to learn this on the fly in quick time.
Yeah.
I've had 40 years of practicing, and I'm still struggling to know what a good man looks like. What healthy masculinity truly is, and I educate people on that. Right? It's not. There's no unified theory. So, like, come on, what's your theory of what a good man is?
For me, it's just looking after people and showing respect. You can still open doors for people. In fact, I love opening doors for men because it makes them feel really uncomfortable, and I get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
It's like my favorite thing I like to do once a day to give myself a little laugh. But just, looking out for people, looking out for the underdog, especially people from marginalized communities, helping people and leveraging that privilege that you sometimes have. For me, it's offering a seat at the table to somebody who needs it, to speak up for people, which in a bigger scale I've done with my activism, but doing it like day to day as well. So, when I worked in corporates, I would always make a point, and it's not my knight in shining armor thing or anything, but just where I spent years and years living as a woman and being spoken over and not being listened to, or having my ideas, not given the credit for my ideas. And sometimes I would say things in meetings or offer up something, and a woman would say the exact same thing, and I'd get the credit for it as a man, and I'd say no, she said the same thing. Just things like that, just looking out for people, using your platform, using your privilege, and just be yourself. Ultimately, it's okay like to be masculine. These things we're talking about are something completely different. They're toxic masculinity or whatever buzzword you want to attach to it. It is great to be a man, and I know that because I've lived luckily as one for 7 years, and I can't wait until I'm a 40-year-old man and all the exciting things I'll have learned by then. I'm if you're still figuring it out, that makes me feel better, because that means I'm still going to be figuring it out. But that's part of being human, which I think is so beautiful.
Do you want to know the one thing I haven't figured out is why at 39 years old, I've suddenly started sprouting hairs on my ears and my nose. I want to understand the evolutionary benefits of suddenly starting to grow hairs on places that make no sense.
Because I started getting nose hairs, and that's been awful for me. I feel really old.
Those are internal nose hairs, right? I'm talking external nose hairs.
My goodness.
Yeah. You've got this all to look forward to, Tate. Don't worry about it. You're going to have hairs growing from places you didn't think you had follicles. So if anybody can explain the evolutionary reason for ear hair and why suddenly at 40 years old I'm starting to sprout it, I would love to know. So please let me know. I know you don't necessarily do this work a huge amount now in terms of your consultancy work in business. What would you say would be the biggest challenge? You mentioned some of them there in terms of the way that women are still treated in the workplace, and of course we are moving towards, perhaps not quite swiftly as some would like, toward gender equity, which is a good thing. What do you say are the biggest challenges in terms of workplace culture that we're failing? Because when I still did this work, and I still do, if anybody is interested, I don't particularly do it very much anymore, of going into a workplace. And I remember standing in like one of the world's biggest sportswear brands, and all of their heads of DEI were in the room. Right, every single one. So there's like 25 people in the room. And I'm standing there and I say, do you know what's interesting? There are 0 straight white men in this room. You are talking about inclusivity. There are 0 straight white men. Because they assumed that I was. And I'm like, no, I'm bisexual. I'm like, he's the head of the LGBT employee resource group. And he's the head of the Latina employee resource group. So there's no straight white guys in the room, and we're talking about inclusion. So like, how do you, as a trans man, and as somebody who is wanting to engage men and apparently successfully doing so by the sounds of it, so kudos for that, because I know how difficult that is. How have you tried to bring men into this conversation around inclusion? What have been your tactics, and what have you found has worked? Because I still think that a lot of DEI practices, and part of the reason there was such a pushback against them, is because a lot of men did feel maligned by them, that they were pushed out of these conversations, that they weren't welcome.
And there's a lot of data to support that as well. And for me, the tactics that I've used are, I would say, first of all, offering more topics to speak about than just my transness. Speaking about social mobility, so being working class, from Essex, from a council estate, receiving free school meals, parents living off benefits, because that for many people, and especially for men in corporates, is their buy-in to listening to me. So it's kind of like a Trojan horse. They come to hear, they want to attach themselves to an element of my story because they're not going to be able to relate to it. But they find a little piece, just like maybe some older women might go, oh, he speaks about menopause, I might learn something from him. And then they hear about the transitioning, and then as I've transitioned, maybe I've experienced accent bias, having a strong Essex accent, and they can see themselves in it. And like, for example, then when you start to bring up, oh, and by the way, I'm a gender equality advocate, and I'm a feminist, and I always have been, and I do this in meeting rooms, or I then speak about menopause, that then inspires them to get involved in DEI. And I also make a point of speaking calmly, eloquently, and on people's level. I don't do terminology training. We're all adults here. They can do that themselves. I don't patronize people. If I use terms or buzzwords, I weave them into the narrative and explain them as I go, rather than just hitting them with too much information. You have to understand, I didn't know that I was trans until I was 16. So I can't expect people to know all the terms, because I didn't. And I still don't, I still don't know all the terms. I get things wrong all of the time, and that's okay. And so can they. And I think I teach them that too, this great thing of calling people in rather than calling people out. And I think that level of understanding really helps them. But I'm very fortunate that a lot of men do naturally come to my talks, because I find in corporate spaces you don't get a lot of male speakers, and that's just from my perspective, speaking in London and speaking sometimes across the UK. I don't know about the rest of the world. So I think that's a big draw to them. But I always encourage people, like you do, to get the men in the room. The senior leaders you need buy-in from to make these changes, to make these policy changes, to make the workplace equitable for all. Let's be real, the senior leaders are going to be male. So there's no point alienating them and saying we don't want no straight white men in here, because these are the people you need to be your allies. So you need to bring them into these conversations and get them on board, that this is why I distance myself from the violence against women and girls space, because I was going into some spaces with people who were calling themselves feminists and saying they wanted male allies in the room, and I would be the only man in the room. But not only that, trans man, there was no cis men in the room, and I need the cis men to support me, not just women, so we've got to get them in the room, but also make things that want them to be there and not be using such language that makes them feel like they're hated just for being something they can't help. Some people can't help being white or straight or cisgender.
Just like you can't help being trans.
No. So let's not throw these terms at them and go, well, what do you know? Because you're this, and this. It's so counterproductive.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your story with us and your expertise and your experiences of transitioning. I genuinely believe that that a lot of men can learn from the experiences of trans men like yourself. Before you go, I have to ask you the question. So I'm going to give you unlimited funds. You're going to have the keys to the vault. With that money, you can do anything you want within reason, right? Like it has to be in terms of giving money to something that is going to benefit the world in the way that you would see it best. So what would you do with that money, and what change would it let me ask you that again. So what would you do with that money, and what change would it make?
My goodness. I would donate it to charities that support trans youth and young adults and who get kicked out of home or have to go and be homeschooled because they're not supported at school or bullied, and help fund camping trips and residential trips and things that they do just to, so they can just live as young people and meet other trans people that just happen to be trans and be themselves, because they're lacking in funding right now. And I would just love to give more safe spaces for parents and carers and young people who are trans or who have loved ones who are trans.
What would that mean to those young people, do you think?
I think a great deal, because they're faced with a world that doesn't understand them, and then they look to older people or the world around them and think, is it going to get any better for me as I get older? And I think if we give more spaces for them to hear from those role models and just meet other people just like them, they're going to feel a lot better in themselves, that they're not alone in how they feel, and actually they can still have fun in the process and be themselves.
Beautiful. Okay, if people want to find you and get in touch with you and book you, where do they go?
So website is tatesmith.uk, not .co.uk, because somebody stole that domain name. So you can find me at tatesmith.uk. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not so active on messages now, but I am comments if you want to get in touch with me. My contact form is on my website, or you can find me over at Instagram, and that is Tate Michael Smith.
Great. Thank you so much, Tate. Really appreciate you giving up the time. And happy Trans Day of Visibility for Tuesday, or the day that this is coming out.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sure you'll be busy on Tuesday. So yeah, thank you again, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to No Man's an Island. If you enjoyed this, please share, like, and subscribe so more people can join in the conversation. This podcast is powered by Men's Therapy Hub, where you'll find more resources, support, and a directory of male therapists for male clients. Don't forget to follow our Instagram and TikTok at Men's Therapy Hub. The music is by the Swedish artist Reindeer, spelled Raindear. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.